Welcome to Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balcerzak. Each episode will explore the passions, expertise, and real-world experiences of security leaders who are helping the future of data security and governance. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To learn more about our AI-powered data security platform, please visit centra.io. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Guardians of the Data. My guest today is a seasoned cybersecurity builder and leader with almost 2 decades of experience. He's built security programs from the ground up for colleges and nonprofits and is currently a CISO in higher education. Dana Kilcrease, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Glad we finally made this happen. We saw each other in person. We've talked about it, and here we finally are. You are a busy, busy man.
Yeah, it kind of goes with the territory, right?
Absolutely. So, Dana, in your professional opinion, what is the biggest data security challenge organizations are facing?
So I think, so the easy answer to this is going to be AI, right? This is what everybody's going to say. And then that's kind of the overarching theme that's kind of stretching across everything right now. But maybe digging in a little bit deeper, I think I would say probably, velocity, right, is really that underlying thing that's happening where all of the security issues that we've been facing forever, the speed at which we're forced to address these issues has been increasing, as AI has come onto the scene. And it's really amplified a lot of the gaps that we've always had, right? So whether it's, just issues with tooling that we've had to maybe we don't have the proper exposure to our boards or other things of that nature, right? So anything that we've been dealing with for a long period of time, all of a sudden these gaps and these technical debts are just growing exponentially. And it's difficult for us to keep up because the resources aren't growing along with the threat, right? And they're not growing along with the technology.
It's not a linear model between the two. They're both growing exponentially. I wish.
And I won't say this is a universal, right? I'm lucky enough to know people across many different sectors and verticals, and some have kept up with the technology and have the budgets and the resources to run at full speed with it. But for the other, I would say probably 75% of us, it has not kept up.
I would agree with a lot of the conversations I've had for sure. So, Dana, yes, absolutely. I think that's been a commonality though over the years, right? I think every year we've said, oh my goodness, like velocity, we got to get, I think it was the opposite though. We got to get faster. We got to patch sooner. We got to do these things sooner. And now it's everything is moving at hyper speed to include, in some cases, security tooling to maybe assist, maybe. So from your perspective, what can we do about it? Or what are you looking to do? Or how are you advising others to try to keep up?
I've taken the approach of taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and really focusing on the fundamentals, right? What are those first principles that we've always had to deal with? And really making sure that it's very easy to see the shiny new thing and have to follow it. But for the past, 18, 24 months, there have been so many shiny new things that it's on a weekly basis. There's something new we can point our attention at. But going back to those fundamentals, those first principles, making sure that, you might not have that newest thing accounted for, but as long as you have other pieces of that kill chain hardened and identified, you're in a good place. And you might not be 100%, and security is never going to be a perfect practice. But getting those pieces in place is really going to pay dividends down the line. And especially because this technology is not going to slow down and resources aren't going to all of a sudden explode and become abundant in our environments. Just making sure you have those endpoints protected, you have those processes in place, you have that incident response plan in place so that you have those resiliency measures is really what it comes down to. So when something does happen, the blast radius is as minimal as possible.
I find it very interesting how a lot of these conversations, really honing in on kind of your last statement there. In the past, people would say, something happens, you could do it. You use the term when, and pretty much all of my conversations that is the case, because I think we are in a world now where it is not if, truly it is not if, it is when. And we used to use just that phrase, I feel like, to scare folks for many years. It's not if we're targeted, it's when we're targeted. Like, no, truly, it is when these days.
Right. And that could be anything, right? It doesn't mean necessarily that we're going to wake up tomorrow to hopefully not to a large scale ransomware, right? That cripples our business for the next 6 months. But I would say not a week goes by, I don't have a user who clicks on a phishing email. And even those smaller security incidents, such as they are, they do add up over time. And there are things that, again, it's just a matter of, sure, our phishing campaigns have gotten more advanced. Attackers have improved their language. They've improved, their abilities on their end. But it's still a matter of doing the same basic first principle fundamentals and saying, okay, well, when somebody clicks on that message, what happens? How bad is it when somebody does that? And really minimizing that downstream effect of those user interactions, because they're just going to get worse over time and they're going to become increasing in frequency.
Agreed. Going back, you mentioned getting really back to the foundations. Those key items that every program should have. Let's focus in on data security. What are a couple that you feel are the absolute musts that everyone should not just be doing, but doing well?
So one of the things we had to do early on in our AI journey was really, again, take a step back and say, well, what do we have? Where's our visibility? Where's our gaps? And we didn't necessarily have anything in place to identify a lot of that. So, the DSPM technology would be the first sort of thing that comes to mind, right? Where it gives you that visibility into what do you have, where are the holes, and not just like, oh, this document might be overshared, but maybe this collection of documents is overshared by this part of your organization. So this is maybe a group of people that you would need to talk to and say, well, just change your process and we can fill in a lot of those gaps. I think really getting a tighter grip on that level of technical debt that tends to accumulate year over year, especially in organizations, we've been around for 95 years now. So imagine, the levels of technical debt that we've had build up over the years. So early on, implementing a DSPM to get that level of visibility, bolstering DLP on top of that, right? So you've identified where that data is, what you have, where that sensitive data is, classify it, put your policies around it, and then make sure it doesn't leak. And those are really the big things to do now. Because again, it's one of those things where AI is just going to increase the likelihood of all of these things happening. It's going to increase the likelihood of people surfacing information through Copilot, or possibly, if somebody, there's an insider risk or an insider threat, all of a sudden being able to rip apart a large part of your environment. It's minimizing the blast radius. It's going back to square one and saying, how do we stop this in the kill chain? How do we get alerted to these things earlier on so we can stop them?
I like it. Definitely speaking my language as a guy who's been doing this for a long time. Although, kind of going back, it seems and sounds simple, right? Do DSPM data discovery, do data loss prevention, do those things. But I mean, you mentioned something interesting, right? Your organization's been around 95 years. You probably have tech debt, probably old data. There's other, organizations out there
Right.
just as old or older, right? With probably same thing. So, really kind of digging into that, like, instead of boiling the ocean, do you have any recommendations on how to start for those? And I'm not even talking about behemoth organization, right? Like we could put some of those big supersized ones to the side. There's plenty of long-lived orgs that have tech debt, old data sitting around that might not know where to start.
It's true. And it's kind of maybe my inner, stoic, where I have to really take a step back and say, well, what can I control? What pieces of this puzzle are things that are solvable at this point, right? With an unlimited budget, if I had $1 billion budget, I could do a lot more and I could fix things. And I could probably say with relatively, a high level of certainty, we will not get hacked in the near future. My budget is not that big. So it's taking a step back and it's saying, well, what can I do with what resources I have in the constraints that I'm working? And I would say for any other organization, we're mid-market size. So any other organizations that fit into that profile, it's really, taking a step back and saying, well, okay, so maybe we don't need to have the latest and greatest MCP, safeguards in place for these particular things as much as we need to go back and make sure that our endpoints have these, security measures on there, or these controls, or these hardening configurations on our servers, or we have MFA in place. Just making sure that you have these basic controls in place is really the first step in combating those larger emerging threats that are coming out.
I like that. Zooming out, and that's something that I've seen over and over again where something happens and there's a knee jerk, right? I mean, plenty of people, plenty of organizations do that. AI was a big one, right? AI came out. Many organizations said, "Oh my God, slam the door shut." Like we're not going to allow that in. But, fortunately slash unfortunately, right, AI jammed its foot in the door and started leaking into every organization. And it's there, right, for better or for worse, and people need to solve for it. But, that's the, again, example of a knee jerk of, hey, I'm going to do this thing. So really what I'm hearing from you, Dana, is, and you mentioned, stop chasing shiny objects, all of that. So stop doing those knee jerks or stop chasing, but really take a breath, take a pause, and think more macro. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, 100%. And you really have to at the point, because there are so many things that would cause knee-jerk reactions. Every day there's a new news story that comes out. But it is kind of a double-edged story, right? Because on one end of it, you are dealing with the constant influx of new news, new things that you have to deal with. But I found that there's a silver lining of sorts, right? Where these news stories are making their way to our boards, right? And one of the things that
Mhm.
CISO and security leaders always fought for over the years is, well, how do I get that executive leadership and that board visibility? How do I get these talks started? And what I found is that now the board is coming down to say, hey, we read about this. What are we doing? And so it's giving maybe more opportunity in a lot of ways to maybe increase the visibility of your security programs, and then, hopefully down the road, get a bigger buy-in to tackle some of these emerging threats.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's definitely a good thing that's coming out of it for sure. Not something that I've thought a lot about as of late, but yeah, I could definitely see that, right? Instead of having to always say, "Hey, look at me," right? Listen to me, think about the security of the organization at the board level. Um, do you find you're getting challenged though at the same time? Like, is it tough to kind of stay in front and try to forecast what some of those questions may be so you have good answers in the moment?
Necessarily. I've found that by staying upfront, being part of the technology, I've been building on my end. So I'm in the technology, not just from a strategic level, but from a builder and practitioner level. And being that level with the technologies allowed me to stay on top of the news a lot quicker than a lot of executive leadership might. So a lot of the questions that I'm asked are then maybe something that I saw surface a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago. So I've already seen it, overcome the question itself, and found the path forward. So it's a matter of staying in the technology to stay ahead of those questions is really going to be the most beneficial.
I haven't asked a lot of folks this on the podcast. I'm going to put you on the spot here. I mean, there's a lot of information out there, right? Like that folks could seek, try to assimilate, to stay in front of these things, to stay up. What are one or two good sources that you leverage to stay up on the latest trends, the latest information that are out there?
There are good blogs. I'm not going to say any specific ones because tomorrow it could completely change. But I do.
Sure.
There are a handful of good blogs that are leading the way. Um, but other resources, even going back to where security news has always come through, whether it is social media or newsletters or those things, there has been a shift I've seen from a lot of the social media world and influencer world, especially, where the focus has absolutely pivoted from cybersecurity being kind of that sexy part of the IT world to, well, that's boring now. Let's go to AI and just talk about AI. So the benefit there is that a lot of the blogs that I was following, a lot of the newsletters, a lot of the people I was following on X or LinkedIn or whatever, just immediately pivot over to AI. And my news has reflected that, and I've been able to stay on top of things.
I mean, I guess that's good and bad, right? You get you're definitely inundated by the AI things, but I suppose with that AI noise, you might miss out on some other things at that point. I too have the same. I'm not going to call it issue, but I too have the same LinkedIn feed. We'll go with that. With very much AI forward and little things here or there sprinkled in.
It is, one of the things for better or for worse, AI has definitely given a voice to a lot of people looking for a voice somewhere. And so a lot of people have a lot to talk about. And unfortunately, it does all kind of boil down to the same thing, because at the end of the day, so many of them simply just use AI to write their post for them, or create their topics for them. And, even if you go into AI and you say, well, I want to further my career. How do I do that? The first thing it says is, well, why don't you go on LinkedIn and start doing these posts? Yeah. So I mean, that's probably a whole different topic, and it to deal with.
Yeah, I totally, I mean, and we see that, right? We see that out there quite a bit. Going back, I'm curious. So again, going back to you and your organization, been around 95 years. So that's not a young organization. I would imagine when AI hit and you started really, doing some of those gap analyses, right? If you will, and trying to figure out what's going on, I would imagine you probably also found some culture items that might not have been great, that you might have needed to try to change or mentor or whatever. For other organizations that might have that as well, right? Cultures of, well, we've always done it this way. We don't want to do it this way, or maybe the opposite of, we've always done it this way, and I want to jump, both feet to Claude instead. Any any tips or tricks that you've leveraged over the last couple of years to make those conversations successful?
So from a cybersecurity standpoint, I would say that we were in a good place as an organization prior to AI coming on board. Our security program is mature enough to the level that we have a good relationship with every line of business that we operate. And we have organization-wide posture that makes sense. When AI hit, though, being in higher education, the biggest thing wasn't necessarily, well, how are we going to secure all of this technology? It was the academic portion of it, right? From an administrative level, it's fairly straightforward, right? We have our data, we want to protect our data. What are the new technologies, and how do we resolve that in each individual bucket that we have? And that's relatively straightforward. But the larger question was, well, okay, so for higher education, what are we doing? And faculty and the academic side look to, obviously, the IT side of the world, saying, well, okay, so how do we stop students from just simply using ChatGPT? And unfortunately, in the beginning, there definitely was a large period. There was a huge gray area where there were no great solutions right off the bat. A lot of the anti-plagiarism tools and things that we had leaned on for years, obviously weren't able to immediately meet that moment. And they have grown to mature to a certain extent since then. It did provide an opportunity from a cybersecurity side to become more ingrained in the business aspects of the organization, where instead of just being that force to say, well, okay, so we're here as part of the procurement. We want to shift everything left. We want, as soon as you think about buying a product, we want to be in the conversation. And that has always been somewhat of a contentious argument in a lot of ways, or a contentious relationship, where when AI came on board, everybody was really looking for guidance and saying, well, how do we come to terms with this? And being able to sit down with academics, each administrative line of business, and talk to them on their level and say, well, what are your concerns? How can we ease those concerns? And then how can we also flip this around and help you utilize this technology, leverage it in a way to increase efficiencies across the board for you? Has really matured my relationship with the business dramatically over the past 18 months.
Love that. So you really more of a partnership at this point is what you would say.
Yes. Yeah. And it's been good. And obviously having those conversations about AI does have that downstream effect of improving your relationship with people and then improving the posture of your security program as a result.
That's really interesting. I mean, for years, and this topic has come up a lot in the podcasts, but for years, folks have said, actually, it started with, "Hey, security is a cost center. It's a money sink. Why are we doing this? How is it enabling the business?" Then there was kind of the interim where that still existed, and everyone's like beating the drum. Hey, you got to get close. You got to create champions, and the idea of creating champions has been kind of a common theme that's come up in episodes.
Huh?
Is that something that you're doing as well with those groups? Now that you've got a good relationship, are you creating some either AI or security champions out there in the business units?
So we have formed a couple of AI committees that are ultimately chaired by CIO, who I report to, and the provost, who's the chief academic officer. And so we have that sitting on the academic side. We have that on the administrative side, and we have several groups that we run in the college as a whole, that are either working groups, whether it's working to update our academic integrity policies or helping faculty come to terms with this new technology, to administrative side, like I said, working alongside each line of business to say, well, how can we help you, realize those efficiencies in your department? And so AI has really grown in those ways. With security, we've always had certain champions that in each department that we could look to and say, these are the people that we can talk to, about any initiatives or anything that we have coming on board. And that hasn't necessarily translated directly into who's going to be the AI champions. But time will tell, right? And as everything moves along, I can't really say.
So, kind of digging into actually that last statement, kind of perfect segue. Time will tell. We are now, scary as this is, right? Looking at the calendar, we now have half of the year behind us of 2026. So you and I are talking, beginning of July here, right? So going into second half, at least second half calendar year. Any thoughts or predictions on where cyber is going to be kind of going in the next 6 months? Usually I say, hey, any predictions about the next 12, 18 months, but things are moving so quick, like it doesn't even pay to forecast out that front. So any big thought for the next 6 months of cyber?
6 months? I don't know. Looking towards the future, though, I think that we're most likely going to see a few shifts. I think that right now we're still at the tail end of that initial explosion of AI's here. We need to find every niche use case for it and have a cybersecurity come out for that. So I think you're going to see somewhat of a collapsing together of companies, right? Where a lot of acquisitions will happen. You're going to see a lot more push towards more unified or a holistic approach to a lot of these things, right? Where you don't have to get these little edge cases. They don't deserve their own product. And for companies of my size, mid-market size companies, we're never going to invest in those types of companies because it doesn't make sense, right? Because maybe not 6 months, 18 months down the road, they will be swallowed up by larger companies, some of whom we might already, right? Like, so Microsoft will probably do a lot of acquisitions. We're seeing, a lot of these other, larger cybersecurity companies bringing these technologies on board. DSPM being an example as well, right? So I think you're going to see a lot of that. Other than that, I think that you're going to see, especially in the mid-market space, I think you're going to see a lot more emphasis on tooling being built in-house, where again, a lot of these smaller edge cases, there is no true moat in your product that would stop a company from just simply having their development team use Claude Code to redevelop it in an hour or two. there's just no chance that these companies are going to survive long term, right? And we've already seen some of that, and in house we've already been doing that. Where I am, where we're not maybe redeveloping entire products, but say we have a use case for a certain piece of a technology. We can develop it in house and we can just manage that in house rather than going through our full procurement policy, allocating a budget for it. We're higher ed, so we operate on a 12-month budget schedule. Um, so it doesn't make sense for us to really invest in like a brand new startup that does this tiny little thing for us when we can just build it. So, from a cybersecurity perspective, that's where I see a lot of the product going in the near future. But also for, again, from the mid-market space, there's a lot of, going back to what I said earlier, like just having that sort of stoic approach where you say, okay, well, I can do so much with the tooling that I have. I can't buy every tool in the world. I can't develop every tool in the world. So there's going to be a certain reliance on our existing vendors to grow as quickly as the attackers are growing, and meet that moment, right? Where you have, obviously attackers are growing, they're leveraging AI, their attacks are becoming quicker, they're developing exploits for CVEs a lot quicker, and we're getting hit with that. But there's only so much we can do at the end of the day, where we do have to rely on those Microsofts, those CrowdStrikes, those larger vendors to say, okay, well, we've developed that technology to be that counterpoint to that attacker. But yeah, time will tell. And the things that I've heard coming out of not just product companies, but also larger organizations who have larger budgets, they are doing things to meet the moment that are really encouraging. And so I do have somewhat of an optimistic view that after 18 or 24 bumpy months that we might have, on the flip side of that, I think we're going to see a lot of technologies emerge that will give us things that we've wanted for the past decade and put us in a stronger security posture than we were maybe 18 months ago.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, I'm already seeing some of that as I talk to folks, right? Like I'll have some conversations. I'll actually get goosebumps and I'll have why the heck didn't I have this 10 years ago? My life would have been easier. And that's like, oh, I didn't have it 10 years ago because the technology wasn't there yet. So I completely agree with everything you just said, for sure, for sure. So Dana, you've clearly been doing this for a while. You've been very successful in your career. What was your journey? How did you get to where you are today?
So I came up through IT is really the short answer. And so I started off as a desktop technician, working my way up through IT and learning the ropes there, right? And learning the hardware aspects, learning that the interacting with users. From there, I taught myself programming and moved into the mobile application development space. From the mobile application development space, I moved into more enterprise level applications.
Well, Dana, I mean, you've been doing this for a while, almost 2 decades, currently a CISO, so you've been successful. What was your journey? How did you get here?
So I came up through IT, like most people in cyber. I started fixing computers on the side, and one of the people I was helping to fix computers ended up being a manager for a desktop technician team. After helping him for a while, he had an opening on his team, and I joined as a desktop technician, which really gave me the background in, kind of that wide breadth of hardware, software, troubleshooting, dealing with end users, understanding everything from a networking level and really that enterprise environment right away. After doing that for a bit I moved into the programming area first, doing mobile application development. I taught myself iOS development back when that was, coming online. And so I became a iPhone developer and developing internal iPhone applications. And from there transitioned into more of the enterprise software development, right? Doing things on top of the Microsoft stack, SharePoint, general web development, and did that for a long period of time. And by that point, I had a pretty rounded understanding of IT, enterprise systems, and everything that encompasses. And it was kind of a natural transition to say, well, what's next? And I pivoted into information security, right? And it was a natural transition, and kind of goes to the argument a lot of people make where cybersecurity isn't necessarily an entry-level job. And the benefit I see of not having it be an entry-level job is, going through IT, coming into cybersecurity and information security with that rounded background allows you to think about protecting systems in really that holistic manner and understanding how all the different pieces fit together, which I think is really important to being successful in cybersecurity. And then it's really just a matter of doing that for a bit and moving into leadership positions, right? After a certain amount of time, the experience across IT and security does lead to a path of leadership and eventually, from, managing to director to CISO, where I've sat for the past 3.5 years now.
Wow. Wow. That is quite the journey. So I'm curious, right? You currently in the higher ed arena. I'm sure you get asked this quite a bit, right? Like, or get the folks that they get a degree, whatever the degree is, and assume I'm gonna go right into cyber, right? I'm gonna get my first job or whatever it ends up being, or I'm gonna get a certification when we get the job. Any any words of advice for those out there looking to get their first cyber gig?
It's difficult and increasingly so over the past 5 years, I would say. Not five, maybe the past 3 years. There has been a large amount of people in the workforce looking for those positions. So the competition's become extremely deep for those entry level positions. I think that there is a probably an undue focus on certifications, where a lot of people think that by racking up certifications, I did this myself. I have a whole stack of certifications, and the thought process is the more certifications I get, the higher likelihood of me getting a job, which I would advise against. What I would advise is to focus on where you want to be in cybersecurity, and attack those certifications. And there's a lot of great roadmaps out there that can plot you from the entry level if you want to be, a pen tester, to, what certifications will lead up to where you want to be, to security research, to, a SOC analyst, or anything else that you want to do. And I would really suggest to focus on those areas, define your niche, and work at that as hard as you can, rather than trying to be everything, right? A lot of people see like CISSP as kind of that gold standard of what you want to achieve. But it's not really a great fit for a lot of people. Personally, I got into information security because I wanted to be a pen tester. And I thought that getting my CISSP would be a good thing. It would help me out in my career, which it has, but it had a negative effect on my ability to become a pen tester because it pushes you into a management track in a lot of respects. So I would have been a lot more likely to go down the pen tester route if I had gone, OSCP and down those certifications and focused in on that niche. So for anybody getting into it now, understand that the competition's deep. It's out there. You're competing against a lot of people with a lot of experience. You're competing against, not just people who have worked in enterprise, but people coming out of the government, people coming out of the army. A lot of veterans who come out of
Oh
the
yeah.
service with significant experience behind them. So if you're struggling to find an entry level cyber job, my suggestion would be to go into IT and work your way up. And it might not be what people want to hear coming out of college, but it's one of those things where, in 5 years, either you're going to still be looking for your first cybersecurity job, or you could have 5 years of help desk experience behind you that would allow you to leverage that into an actual cybersecurity job.
I think that's good advice. I think there's a lot of ego, right? People go and get, bachelors. Maybe they go bachelors right to masters. Maybe to your point, they stack up those badges, the certifications, and they're like, "Oh man, look at me! I'm going to get this job." And they won't. They let their ego get in their way instead of going the IT route, which I did. I've had a lot of guests that have done as well. Very legitimate route, right? Very, very good way to your point to get that experience. So now I'm really curious, given your track that you laid out there, like how much do you find yourself like kind of going back to that knowledge that you've obtained in those early days? Like, does it happen quite a bit, or is that just the foundation and you're on to bigger and better things from a knowledge platform?
So it's a good question. And it's one of those things where I lean on what I've learned a lot because I operate in a similar environment to what I learned in, if that makes sense, right? So there are different types of CISOs, and I've seen this, across the board where there's a lot of CISOs who come up the way I did through IT or through, working in entry level jobs and bit by bit work their way up through the ranks. And then there's, your MBAs, CISOs who lead, Fortune 100 companies and things like that. They're two completely different worlds. And so it's really defining what your end goal is going to be, and working towards that. For me, being in the same environment that I learned in every day, I am able to say, well, oh, this is a problem that we're having. And because I understand the environment, I understand how these pieces of an enterprise fit together in this type of an organization. I'm able to quickly identify what needs to be done, whether it's a project, whether it's an incident, whatever it may be. And I'm very good at doing that in my environment. If you threw me into a Fortune 50 company, I don't have an MBA. And so there would be a lot different approach needed to be successful in that environment.
More of a learning curve, essentially.
Yes. Well, a different skill set, really. Dealing with, for me, dealing with managing IT resources and cross-functional teams is a lot different than managing, global lines of business across, whatever, 30, 50, 100,000 employee size, organization a lot of these people run, which, again, is, to be successful in those roles is a different skill set. You don't necessarily need to know help desk stuff to be a successful, C-level employee at those types of companies.
Sure, that makes sense. So, again, starting your career in IT, being successful, pivoting into cyber or information security back then. Now everyone's called it cybersecurity. It's all the same thing, in my opinion. But anyways, if you'd go back in time and maybe talk to yourself when you're in those IT roles, is there a different track you would have taken, or do you like the track you took and all those experiences that made you where you are today?
I think that it's inevitable that I don't want to say inevitable, even though I do mean it, that after a certain amount of time, you're going to have to move from a practitioner role through most people, move from a practitioner role into a leadership position. So for me to be in the position I'm in now, and especially with AI and being able to kind of dip back into the technical aspects more and leverage the things that I grew up learning, is a great fit for me. With that said, like I said, I got into information security for the pen tester, aspect and really, had a strong passion for that. Sure, maybe I'll go back in time and say, well, maybe I get the OSCP instead of the CISSP. And who knows where that would have ended up. But, I don't think I would change much in my journey so far.
That's funny to think about, right? If you'd gotten your OSCP, like, would you be like an Uber red teamer out there doing that type of work, or would you have still landed in the same spot? It's, for me at least, thinking about my own career, it's always interesting to think about.
No, absolutely. And I actually have taken the OSCP training, although I've never sat down for the test. And it's fascinating, and I have so much respect for the people who do that.
Now I am curious, as you've done the training, would you go in and sit for the certification?
No, because there's no real benefit at this point in my career. I don't think it would necessarily pay dividends. Um, Again, certifications are one of those things where a lot of people look at them as a stepping stone into something, where I tend to look at certifications now as they certify that you know how to do something. And taking that approach is, well, what do I want to certify? What do I need to prove to anybody that I can be a pen tester? No, you don't. That's not going to necessarily help me. I don't need to prove to anybody that I'm a SOC analyst, or any of those roles, even though I do understand, what goes into those. Um, so yeah, no, I definitely would not sit for any. And I don't know if there really are any certifications that I would sit for at this point. Even some of the AI ones that have come on board aren't necessarily too attractive. for me at this point.
Not yet. I've looked at a few of those too. I was like, "Meh, I'll wait." But here's the thing with those, right? Like with everything happened to everything we've talked about before, so hyper fast. Like you could take one of those, and it's highly likely it's going to be null and void in 6, 12 months from now, anyways.
Right, right. And what's it going to show? And that's at the end of the day, if you're going to put something on your resume, what does it show about you? What are you trying to prove with it? And great, a low-level AI certification um, doesn't really mean much these days, as much as experience. Experience trumps everything. So if you have the option of taking a certification or getting into the trenches and really learning what this means, get into the trenches by all means and go nuts.
Well, there you go, listeners. You heard it directly from Dana. Don't worry about the badges as much as getting your hands dirty and learning something. So Dana, if folks want to follow, connect with you, maybe reach out, what's the best way to do so?
Connect on LinkedIn. Yeah, happy to have any conversations that are helpful.
So, well, Dana, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a great episode.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And big thank you to the audience. Really hope you learned something today and enjoyed the episode. Please tell others in your network to follow and listen. This has been another exciting episode of Guardians of the Data. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Guardians of the Data. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes and more, visit guardiansofthedata.show. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To see how we help organizations discover and classify all of their data accurately and automatically while quickly achieving petabyte-scale data protection without the fuss, please visit Centra.io. Catch you next time.